Good morning, Kentucky. It's great to be with you. My name is Damian Sweeney. I am the new Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Kentucky Department of Education, previously the Program Coordinator for Comprehensive School Counseling. Today we're talking about the Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors, and I'm really excited that you're all online with us today or in person at your co-ops, making sure that you're receiving the same message and that we're rowing in the same direction together. This is a really unique opportunity that we have to ensure that we're rowing together. We're all hearing that same message, so I want to make sure that I thank a lot of people that have made today possible. First and foremost, Letitia Sparks from KDC came to me with this idea over the summer to do a statewide school counseling network meeting, to have a series of meetings. So we'll have 4 this year that we're really excited about. We're also very, very appreciative of Melissa Wainwright from OVEC for setting up the Zoom, managing the Zoom, and making sure that all of our technology is how it should be. And of course, I've got dear friends here at the Kentucky Department of Education, Megan and Andy, who help with our technology, so I want to give them a huge shout out for helping today. We also have many of our co-op folks that represent school counselors, that make sure that they help grow school counselors, that have helped today make today possible. So big shout out to everybody that's been involved. All right, let's get started. So my background is that I've been a school counselor for 8 years at Seneca High School and JCPS, a high school English teacher, and a high school special education teacher. I'm currently an adjunct professor at Spalding University and the University of the Cumberlands. And I'm going into my 4th year here at the Kentucky Department of Education. For college, I went to Transylvania University for my undergrad, got a master's in teaching at Bellarmine University, master's in education for school counseling at University of Louisville, and then a doctorate in educational leadership at University of Louisville as well. Many of our school counselors are interested or have shown an interest in potentially getting their doctorates, which is why I wanted to put this educational background on the screen. If that is you, if that is something that you are considering, and you just want to talk to somebody about it, feel free to reach out to me, shoot me an email, we can talk about it. We need more research on school counseling as a profession, and specifically school counseling here in Kentucky. A huge shout out to Dr. Sharon Todd, who has successfully defended her dissertation this year and has recently been named Dr. Sharon Todd. And also a huge shout out to future Dr. Kate Barron, who I know will be doing some great research on school counseling in Kentucky. She's from Bullitt County. So again, feel free to reach out if you have questions about getting that doctorate. Now, today's learning targets, we've got 3 of them, right? So first, we're going to explore the Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors. And while doing so, you'll be able to reflect on your current comprehensive school counseling program and identify ways to grow. Next, you'll be able to utilize new tools that will help you and your comprehensive school counseling program. So we'll talk a lot about different tools that have come up that we've created in Infinite Campus, different reports in Infinite Campus that should be helpful, and different things from the Kentucky Department of Education, along with the American School Counseling Association as well. So I want to make sure that we talk about the lay of the land for today. All right, today is not about me at all. I'd be lying if I told you that making sure that everything went smoothly today wasn't anxiety-provoking for me for quite some time and for some different people on the call. But at the end of the day, it's all because we wanted to make sure that you had a great experience today. All right, so it's not about me. It is about our growth together as school counselors who are doing our part for our school communities. Together, we do help Team Kentucky. All right, your work is bigger than you. It's bigger than your school. It's bigger than your district, right? It helps kids all of our state. And ensuring that we are proactive, data-driven school counselors who are implementing a multi-tiered system of support is going to be paramount to our success as a state. All right? And then just a reminder, there are no wrong questions or answers today. Okay? So for today to be successful, we need to have open, vulnerable conversations in breakout rooms or in person. Again, today's much more about me giving you some high-level information, you getting into that document, and then having some really strong conversations at your co-op and with the people that work with you in your educational region. All right, so we're going to start off with a breakout room. All right, and in that breakout room, I just want you to answer 3 questions. Okay, I want to know, and I want you to discuss, what do you love about your school counseling program? Okay, what do your students love about your program? And then what about your teachers and administrators? What do they love about your program? I want to remind you that today is all about being asset-based, all right? We want you to be asset-based school counselors in Kentucky. So, of course, you're going to find some things that today that you're going to say, oh, okay, I need to focus on that in the future. I need to make sure I'm prioritizing that in the future. But we also know that you've been crushing it this year, right? You've been crushing it for a long time, okay? And we want to make sure that you are discussing the successes in your program, thinking about the successes in your program, and not just focused on, oh, I wish I had done this. I wish that this had gone different, or I wish that this was different for my program overall. All right, so we're going to go to breakout room for 10 minutes. We'll post these 3 questions in the chat box, and then we'll come back around 9:15. All right, we should be back. All right, I can see you. So thumbs up, give me a thumbs up if the first breakout room went okay, went smoothly. Let me know. Think good? All right, wonderful.
Damien,
Yes,
we did have some that didn't have the option to join, and they've been putting it in the chat where they want to go. I'll work on those, but the most efficient way would be if possible, if you didn't get in a breakout room, if you would rename yourself with your co-op. It's just a lot quicker that way, so that the next time we can be ready to go. But I am trying to go through the chat and find them to get them assigned if they weren't assigned.
All right, thank you so much, Melissa, for that information. All right, so we'll continue to work on our breakout rooms and make sure that everybody's getting to where they need to be in the future. So far, I've heard from Greg that the conversation is good and that things are going well. So again, I think it's really important for you to remember that today is all about being asset-based. We're not deficit-based as school counselors. We've got a lot of obstacles that we have to overcome. However, we know that having good energy, having positive energy is going to help the people that we serve and the people that work with us. All right. So let's start thinking about our framework, right? Why do we need a framework, and how did this work get started? Now, I promise you, we're only going to read 3 slides, but I think it's important to set the stage. Okay, so you most likely have a device. You most likely can see the Kentucky framework of best practices. If not, you can go to the school counseling. You can just Google KBE school counseling. We've got an image of the framework. You can click on that and you can follow along. But I'm going to have Sarah Aiken from WKEC. She's going to read a little bit about the roles and responsibilities. And then after she reads the first slide, I'm going to have Melissa Wainwright from OVAC read the second one. Again, this is just setting the stage for why we need a framework of best practices in Kentucky for school counselors. So, Sarah?
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, great. The daily work of the school counselor may differ depending on the setting and context: urban, suburban, rural, elementary, middle, high school, or career and technical center, and so on. At the core, however, the work of the school counselor is to provide direct and indirect student services in support of students' academic, career, and social and emotional development. School counselors maintain their focus on students' development levels and short and long-term goals and provide services accordingly. They also serve as leaders who can advocate on behalf of their students within their schools and share in the creation of positive learning environments. To ensure their effectiveness, school counselors continuously engage in a cycle of improvement in which they adjust their professional learning and practices according to informed analysis of available data.
So already we're seeing a few things that are huge for us to kind of keep an eye on, right? At the core, the work of the school counselors to provide direct and indirect student services, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between direct and indirect student services in just a minute. And then we work in 3 domains, right? We support students in 3 different ways. We support them academically with their college and career, and then we also support them socially and emotionally. All right. That last paragraph that Sarah read, she talks about short and long-term goals, all right, and providing services accordingly. School counselors can provide therapeutic services. However, it's important to note that school counselors are not therapists, right? So you're not providing long-term developmental, social, and emotional therapy, okay? But the services that you do provide can be therapeutic in nature. So that's going to be really important. And then to ensure their effectiveness, school counselors continuously engage in a cycle of improvement. Well, that's why you're here today. And we appreciate your attendance and your participation, right? We're always trying to grow, constantly trying to grow. And then we also talk about our professional learning and practices should be informed by an analysis of available data. So we'll get much more into that in just a minute. I'm going to have Melissa read this next slide.
Effective school counselors possess a wide body of knowledge in specific personal and professional competencies. With the adoption of the Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors, along with the Kentucky Standards of Preparation for School Counselors, and the alignment to the American School Counseling Association's, ASCA, national model, Kentucky has clearly defined the knowledge, skills, and competencies of effective school counselors. The Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors, the Kentucky Standards of Preparation for School Counselors, and alignment to the ASCA national model promote best practices for Kentucky school counselors and offer a core set of expectations. Kentucky school counselors offer students access to the kinds of high-quality, direct and indirect student services described throughout this document, which will support students' academic, career, and social-emotional development.
All right. Thank you, Melissa and Sarah. So both speakers, both Sarah and Melissa, just mentioned direct and indirect services. So speaking of that, let's talk about it. All right, when we talk about direct student services, the state of Kentucky says that school counselors should be spending 60% of their time in direct student services. All right, one of the things that I love about our state is that we take this really serious. So by November 1st of every year, your superintendents, and they just did this, your superintendents are supposed to gather data from the school counselors in the district on how those school counselors spend their time. The hope with that process is that if there is something off, right, let's say a school counselor is spending 30% of their time or 40% or even less of their time in direct student services, well, that suggests that we need to really look at the priorities of that school counselor, look at the activities that that school counselor is participating in, and then figure out how can we get more appropriate activities for school counselors on to be that priority. Okay, so a direct student services is going to be what we're doing right now. You can see me, I can see you, I'm offering you services right now, all right? It can be face-to-face, it can be virtual. Now, an indirect student service is when I do something on your behalf, right? So if you're my student and I see that you're struggling academically, or I see that you're struggling with your attendance, I might walk down the hallway to my FRISC and I might say, hey, this person is really struggling with their attendance. I think there might be something going on. What can we do together to make sure that this person has what they need and that they can get to school? What services can we provide? What support can we offer? Right, so now the school counselor is working on behalf of that student with other people. So an indirect student service can be working with other colleagues. It can be working with the family or the parents or guardians. It can be working with outside community agencies. It can be working with a number of people on behalf of your students, right? And 20% of your time should be spent doing indirect student services, right? So now we're up to 80. The final 20% of your time should be doing school-based school-based activities and program planning. Okay, so if your principal says, hey, I really need you to do this, that is something that you certainly can do, but you shouldn't be doing that more than 20% of your time unless it has to do with a direct student service or indirect student service. Okay? All right. So kind of keep your eye on that. Keep your eye on the fact that 60% of your time should be spent doing those direct student services. 20% of your time should be indirect. And then again, program planning and other duties as assigned for the final 20%. All right. Did you know that the Kentucky Board of Education last year, they created a resolution affirming its commitment to racial equity in Kentucky public schools. And specifically, they said this. They said, be it resolved that we urge all schools to examine the Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors, released by the Kentucky Department of Education on June 2nd, 2020. This framework is the first of its kind in the Commonwealth and helps to reimagine the roles and responsibilities of school counselors so they can better meet the immediate needs of our students. We call on all education personnel to focus on the mental health needs of the students, provide more individual and small group counseling services, and increase care for the whole child, because we know that a child who is hurting cannot learn. Now, I know that if this is the first time you've seen this, you're probably clapping a little bit. Your heart is probably happy. This is exciting that your Board of Education has specifically pointed out this document as one way to help our students heal and to help them get the services that they need. Okay? All right. So I think it's really cool that Kentucky school counselor is the only role that was specifically pointed out in the KBE's resolution. All right. When we developed this framework, we did so with university partners. We did so with school counselors all over the state of Kentucky. And I have to give so much credit to my predecessor, Robin McCoy, who is currently the principal at Marshall County High School and formerly the very first program coordinator of comprehensive school counseling at the Kentucky Department of Education. And what Robin did is she said, I want to collect people from the field in our state. I want to bring them together, and we are going to not only define a Kentucky school counselor, but we're going to create this framework of best practices for currently practicing school counselors. And then we're also going to create this preparation document for our graduate schools so that they can be rowing in the same direction. Now, we came together here in Frankfort a couple of years ago. Robin was nice enough to come by as well, and she helped finish up, put the final touches on this definition that you see on your screen right now. And she and I thought that this process, redefining the role of a Kentucky school counselor, it might take like half a day, it might take a few hours, it ended up taking the whole day, all right? But it was worth it because this is what we came up with. A Kentucky school counselor is a certified mental health professional. Think about that. You are a certified mental health professional supporting all K through 12 students in their social, emotional, academic, and career development. Through a comprehensive school counseling program, counselors provide data-informed, universal, and targeted learning experiences to develop the whole child in a diverse society. Right? So this is our role. This is the definition of a Kentucky school counselor. Now, when we think about the audience and purpose of this document, we specifically said that this document is for practicing school counselors. And the purpose of articulating clear statewide standards is to provide a resource for school counselors to better understand what they should be doing in schools and to support school counselors in advocating for the importance of their profession. Engaging in professional reflection and self-assessment and pursuing their own professional learning. All right, so that is the audience and purpose of the document. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin exploring this document that we keep speaking of. So again, if you just Google KDE school counseling, our school counseling webpage will pop up and you'll see this image that you see on your screen. Click on that image and you'll have access to the document. So you can feel free to follow along. We are going to also be doing a Padlet. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll have these conversations, these great conversations in breakout rooms, or if you're in person at your co-op. And then when questions come up, feel free to put those in the Padlet. Okay, so based on the conversation that we have, based on the best practice that we're focused on or looking at the time, if questions come up that are connected and aligned to that best practice, again, feel free to put those in the Padlet. Now, to get you started in the Padlet, we have kind of a fun icebreaker, all right, that you'll be able to do based on your birthday. So go ahead, head to that Padlet. You can do that on your phone. You can do that on your computer, and then we'll get started. So as you're looking at the document, as you're looking at the Kentucky Framework of Best Practices, we're going to put you back in your breakout rooms or give you back to your in-person meeting. You've got facilitators in those meetings with facilitator guides. You've got 15 minutes to just explore best practice number 1. All right, explore that. If there are things that stand out to you, feel free to put them in the Padlet. Feel free to point them out and talk about that. If there are things that you're not so sure about, how am I going to do this? You'll be able to engage in a conversation within that co-op or that breakout room. Okay, so 15 minutes, look at that best practice number 1, and then we'll come back together. So my hope is that that you've had a great conversation in your breakout rooms, or if you're in person at your co-op, about best practice number 1. I've already seen some cool comments come through about this best practice of professional identity come through the Padlet. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to enter those in the Padlet as well, and I can take off with those and answer those questions for you. But I'm already seeing that many of you feel that as a professional school counselor, that one of your main priorities should be to advocate for your students, right? And I have always seen this as we're advocating for all students, of course, but we're emphasizing students that really don't have a voice, right? Students that may traditionally be underrepresented. I think finding ways to support them is also really, really important. And it's part of our professional ethical responsibilities as well. All right. So I'm also seeing that it's important to track your time with your use of time calculator from the American School Counseling Association. We'll have some different resources for that. Seeing how other people are tracking their time through Google. And one other thing that I saw on the Padlet is that we've got counselors that are finding ways to share their data monthly, right? So I'm seeing some really great newsletters that people are sharing with their staffs that show how many students they've seen, what are kind of the most prevalent reasons that those students need to be seen, what is the data in terms of needs that school counselors are seeing, what small groups are they running at the time, right? So making sure that not only are you collecting data, but also that you're sharing that data out with specific stakeholders is also going to be really important for you. All right. I want to highlight a few other things. So with professional identity, one of the bullets says that school counselors utilize the history of school counseling to create a context for the current state of the profession and comprehensive school counseling programs. So this is really, really important for everybody on the call to understand. You are not a guidance counselor, all right? It's a very, very outdated term. Guidance counselors back in the day focused on things like vocations. They focused on being very reactive often, all right? School counselors are very preventative and proactive, right? They are looking at data. They're trying to find ways to support the whole child. So titles really do matter. I'm going to show you this document real quick from ASCA that I love. All right, so take a look at your screen. Right, this shows the difference between a school counselor and a guidance counselor. And one of the arguments that is made is when we refer to ourselves as guidance counselors, it actually has a negative impact on all of the people that are doing the school counseling work throughout the state, because people naturally will connect that title with what their guidance counselor may have done, 20, 30, 40 years ago. All right. So making sure that we're communicating to all stakeholders about the title school counselor, the role of a school counselor, how you support the people in your school community is going to be paramount. As a matter of fact, we do something called flashlight presentations as school counselors. And a flashlight presentation is something where for 10 minutes, you're going to find ways to connect to students and tell them a little bit about your role. You're going to find ways to give that information to your families. You're going to find a way to give that information to your colleagues. So flashlight presentation, 10 minutes only, about your role. The difference between a guidance counselor and a school counselor is a great way to advocate for your role. All right. And then another thing that I continue to hear is, I'm just a school counselor. And we think of you at KBE as superheroes, okay? So you are not just a school counselor. The fact that you are able to see kids, find ways to meet with whole groups of students, find ways to support the needs of individual students and their families, among everything else that you're being asked to do, is really impressive work. To me, it's some of life's most rewarding work in my experience. So remember that we should all wear that title of school counselor with pride. All right. Another thing that was discussed in best practice number 1 with this professional identity is that we should be using multi-tiered systems of supports. Okay? We have phenomenal people that we are fortunate enough to work with at our schools, right? We've got school social workers, school psychologists. Often we've got mental health counselors and friskies, among other people. How can we work with them in all 3 of the tiers, right? So that first tier 1 for a school counselor is going to be going into the classroom, doing whole group instruction, right? Often, as you know, much of that work is going to be connected to social emotional learning. Okay, if you're at a high school, some of it's going to be connected to college and career. Some of it's going to be connected to that academic support as well. So how are we utilizing our role in each tier? And then how are we utilizing the people that we work with such unique expertise in each tier as well? I would have loved to take my mental health counselor into the classroom to do a tier 1 lesson on anxiety or depression to help normalize feelings. Okay, so it is a phenomenal opportunity that we have to utilize this expertise, to work side by side, to make sure that we've got systems in place, protocols in place, so we're communicating with everybody that is a school-based or community-based mental health professional, and making sure, again, that we're all rolling in the same direction. We also have ASCA's mindsets and behaviors, ASCA student mindsets and behaviors. These are your student standards, okay? This is what we hope our students will be able to do as a result of our comprehensive school counseling program. And what I love about the student mindsets and behaviors is we can literally take 1 or 2 mindsets and behaviors. We can design a whole lesson about that to make sure that our kids have that information and they're leaving our programs with those tools in their tool belts. Okay? Now, that best practice number 1 also talked about the need for individual school counseling and small group counseling. All right? So we need to make sure that we are tending to the needs of our students, right? How are we accessing those students? How are they communicating their needs? And how are we supporting those, whether it's in individual school counseling, small group school counseling, or again, that whole group. Also, with the student mindsets and behaviors, I just mentioned, this is one set of standards for you. This is your set of standards for students, but you have 2 other sets. All right. So one of those other sets is ASCA's professional standards. All right. How should school counselors carry themselves? How should we be focused on supporting our students? And then we've also got ASCA's ethical standards, right? What do we need to be mindful of to ensure that we are being ethical in our school counseling practices? Now, I already mentioned her, but Dr. Sharon Todd has done a fantastic dissertation on this topic, and I'm very excited about the future presentations that she'll be able to offer Kentucky school counselors on this subject as well. All right, again, we come back to advocacy. I have heard story after story about school counselors that were this close to losing their positions, right? Not because of anything they did. Maybe there was a decision made outside of them that, hey, this school counseling thing, maybe if we cut that position, we'll have money to fund this other thing. And time again, they tell me that the thing that saved them was their advocacy for their role with families, with students, with colleagues, with other district personnel, and that they were also data-driven. Okay, they were able to show data that helped back up the job and the role that they did. Okay, so advocating every chance that you get. One thing I know about you as a school counselor in this session is I know that you're humble and you don't like to brag, right? You don't want to tell everybody, hey, because of my work, kids at our school have earned over $1 million in scholarships. That's not really something that we are good at, right? We want to shine the light on other people. But sometimes it's really important to make sure that we're communicating the benefit that we bring to the table. Again, how many students are we seeing a month? What are the highest needs that we're seeing? How are we providing support? How are we collaborating with colleagues or families or other people in our communities? Okay, so advocate, advocate, advocate. It's not bragging, right? You can do so humbly, but you have to share what you're doing with other people. Okay, many people have misunderstandings about our role. They think at times they can think, well, you're just waiting on students to come to you with problems. And as you know, your role is so much bigger than that. Okay, all right, so make sure that you're advocating, you're talking about how proactive you are, how data-driven you are, and the services and supports that you're providing to your students. Something else that we have is a document called Appropriate versus Inappropriate Activities for School Counselors. Okay, our appropriate versus inappropriate activities for school counselors. Now, I'm doing my best to support you by sharing this document. I was just on a webcast with all of our superintendents and shared that document to show them this is what school counselors should be doing, right? But I really hope that you will back me up and share that document as well. Figure out how much time are you spending on that appropriate side for school counselors, that appropriate activities for school counselor side, versus how much time you're spending on that inappropriate activity side. Okay, document that, share that, right? And you don't have to share this by me being rude or insensitive or mean and saying, look at me, I'm spending way too much time on this inappropriate side. It's not about that, right? But it is about saying, hey, by me spending more time on this side of the document and less time on these appropriate activities for school counselors, our students are actually missing out on what they can have and should have from a comprehensive school counseling program. Again, we also just did our use of time survey, and one thing that I'm really excited about with that survey is that we made sure we took all of those activities from that document and we embedded them into the survey, right? And this was in part so that our district leaders who were completing the survey would, again, have a better understanding of roles that you should be doing and roles that the American School Counseling Association considers inappropriate for us. All right. So we're going to go back to our breakout room, and we're going to have 15 minutes of conversation. We're going to talk about best practice number 2. All right, what highlights do you see in best practice number 2? What are some things that kind of concern you or worry you? What questions do you have? I'm interested in seeing those questions in the Padlet because I'll come back and try and answer any questions that are in there. All right, just make sure that when you put that question in, you also help us out by letting us know what co-op you represent. All right, so take a look at best practice number 2. Read through it on your own for a few minutes. Your Your facilitator has different questions that he or she can ask you. Have that conversation. Put any questions that you have in that Padlet. We'll come back around 10:25. Thank you. Well, let's jump back in. Thanks, Andy. All right, so we're going to finish up best practice number 2. I'm going to give you some resources. We're going to talk about your questions, and we'll do a bathroom break before going to best practice number 3, our final best practice. All right, but I want to go back to some of the questions that I saw in the Padlet. Okay, first off, I saw a question about how do we help at the high school level create buy-in from other people, right? So for our programs. And I will tell you that this is a barrier that I had to cross, right? As a high school counselor, the first thing that people told me when I got my job, literally the first day is, oh, you're not going to be with students. You're going to be in your office. You're going to be doing these kinds of meetings. You're going to be doing a lot of administrative work, a lot of paperwork. And I did not get a degree in school counseling to do that, right? So, of course, there are parts of that are important, but for me, making sure that I was in front of kids every single day, that I was getting in and out of classrooms, that I was always in the hallway between classes was extremely important. All right, so I'm going to give you some tools later on that'll help you make sure that you are aligned with your team, and they know not only the importance of the job that you're doing, but they also know exactly where you'll be when for the week. All right, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll talk about huddling, we'll talk about blocking off time on your calendar, we'll talk about all of that. All right, but making sure that you are, again, communicating that role, right, that you're not settling. It takes a very, very strong, brave person to say, hey, I know this is how you've done school counseling prior to me, but I'm going to come in and I'm going to revamp things because I know that we need to be much more proactive, that we need to really build a comprehensive program that's going to benefit all students. Okay, so making sure that you're communicating those things is important. And then I will tell you, I know that this kind of sounds funny, but people are watching, right? When I left Seneca, I was surprised at how many people said things like, I really respect the way that you walked in the hallways in the mornings. I really respected the ways that you got into classes, that you had relationships with students, that you found ways to honor us and value us as teachers, right? They would say those things. So they notice when you're finding cool ways to connect with the people around you, okay? It is very easy, and it would have been very easy to say, you know what? There's too much paperwork. There's too much administrative work. I'm going to put myself in my office. I'm going to lock the door, and nobody has access to me. But that's just not how I was built. That's not who I am. That's not who I wanted to be as a school counselor. I wanted to be in the classroom. I wanted to be in the cafeteria. I wanted to find ways to connect with and support families, and I had to do that by, again, being proactive and communicating that role to my principal, to my assistant principals. We also, at the high school level, had CAP teams. So a CAP team is a school counselor assistant principal team. What's cool about that relationship for me is I got a whole other perspective about our kids. We worked in academy, so we were in charge of certain groups of kids, right, based on our caseload. And together, we would find solutions to obstacles that our kids were facing. Together, we would do walkthroughs in classrooms, right? Together, we would find ways to get to know kids and their families. All right, so that's another way of advocating for your program, informing your administration, and then it also gives them a better sense of how your role works. It was often the case, it became often the case that my assistant principal would say, hey, I've been working on Johnny and his behavior for a long time, right? And I've had to kind of do the hard press on Johnny. I need you to go in and give him a softer touch and give him some support from your school counseling lens, from your school counseling perspective, right? We were only able to do that because we were constantly communicating, and she had a better understanding of my strengths and the things that I brought to the table as a school counselor. Okay, so those are some ways that you can do that. I also saw some questions about how do we create What are you doing to share the message that everybody is welcome, right? And that you support all students. I think this is it has to be a priority of all school counselors, right? I think of you as hope dealers. Now, it's really important that you heard the first letter of that, the H, okay? So you are hope dealers, all right? And by being a hope dealer, you are finding ways to make sure that those at the margins, those kids at the margins that may feel like they are alienated or isolated or social outcasts in many ways, that you're finding ways to support them. All right. I think it's also really important that we don't just look at kids that might be struggling in one of those three domains. But we also look at kids that might be kind of in the middle, right? So they're finding ways to get by, but they may not be giving 100%, right? There may be something else that they need. So we're finding ways to get to them. And then I also know that it's easy to say, well, hey, this kid is number 1 or top 10 in their class. They're good, right? But those kids also need our support, our compassion, and our love. Okay, so finding ways to connect them and show them that they are meaningful parts of your school community as well. I think inclusivity is huge, and everybody deserves to feel welcome, no matter the identity that they bring in their school. Diversity is often confused with black and white, but diversity can mean things like LGBTQIA+, right? It can mean things like speaking another language, being from another country. It can mean a number of things. And no matter the identity that a kid brings to school, they deserve to know that there's an adult that cares about them deeply and has their back. And I can't think of a better role than a school counselor to provide that support. Okay? A couple other things that I saw on the Padlet. You would be surprised at how far a small sticker goes to show kids that they're welcome. And JCPS, we had these stickers that we would put on our offices to show that I don't care what your identity is, but this is a safe space. And because of that small sticker, kids would come in and just say, I have some questions. I have some things I want to share with you. All right, so there are some small things that we can do to make sure that we are providing that inclusive environment. See if there are any other questions. All right, how do we push the desire to step out being an itinerant teacher? Okay, that seems like that's probably going to take a little bit more side conversation. So we'll come back to that one. All right. Okay, so let's talk about individual counseling and small group counseling. Where do you start? And this is a question that has come up in my time at KBE quite a bit. I think you start with data, right? And I know that there's so much data out there, but if you just focus on 3 data points, ABC data is what we call it here in Kentucky. So if you focus on attendance data, if you focus on behavior data or course passing data, and another way of saying course passing is achievements, if you focus on those 3 things, you're going to be able to figure out what kids have different needs, okay? Now, of course, that's not the only kind of data that we can use. There's some other data points that we need to be aware of as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But starting with the data is important. And I told you already that I'm an adjunct professor at University of Cumberland's and Spalding University, so I'm going to put on my professor hat for just a moment. And I want to remind you that in individual counseling, school counselors can use solution-focused brief counseling. So we can ask kids scaling questions. Hey, I see that you're coming in. You look really upset. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing? Oh, you're at a 4? Well, tell me what more about why you're at a 4. And then let's try and figure out a way for you to get to a 6. Okay, so that's just a quick example of how you can use the scaling technique in your school counseling program with individuals. There's also a technique called exceptions. I understand that you're really upset right now, but tell me a time when this problem was not happening. Okay, that reminds kids and it reminds us that the whole world is not falling. Okay, it's easy. Think about yourself. And think about yourself when you're facing an obstacle or a problem, right? For you and for me, we tend to really hone in on that problem, and that's all we can see. We become that horse with blinders. All we can see is that problem in front of us, and our whole world becomes that problem. Well, with exceptions, we're reminding kids that that problem wasn't always there. Sure, this is a tough time or a difficult time, but there have been times in your life when those problems were not there, and there will be those times again. All right, our next technique is problem-free talk. And counselors, I feel like all of us should be using problem-free talk. Now, if I came to you and said, hey, I'm a school counselor, I'm here to support you, tell me all your deepest, darkest secrets, I'm going to try and find ways to support you. You'd be like, I don't know you. I would never tell you that stuff, right? And it's not only about finding kids' deepest, darkest secrets, but in order for you to create trust and authentic relationships, you've got to find ways to connect with kids when those problems are not there, right? So for me, I had things like the sticker I just told you about. I always had a skateboard in my office with cool graffiti art. I'm a soccer player, so I always had soccer stuff. I love music and hip hop, so I would always have posters in my office with different musicians. And those just served as talking points, foundational starting points to conversations. It was often the kids would be walking in the hallways, and because I had posters about music, they would say, hey, I like that artist too. What do you think about this track? What do you think about that song? That would open up a whole new relationship. And then down the road, when there were issues, that kiddo felt like they could trust me and bring those issues to me. I would be lying if I told you that I saw myself as somebody that was going to solve all of the kids' problems. That's not how I rolled, and that's not who I wanted to be. But what I wanted to do is, as a school counselor, I wanted to show kids that there was somebody in that building that cared about them, that would listen to them actively, right? That would actively listen to them, and that would find ways to support them. And together, I hoped to find solutions to their issues. Now, there's also miracle questions, okay? So I know that you've got this really hard thing that you're working through right now, but if you went to sleep tonight and you woke up tomorrow morning and all of your problems were gone and the world was exactly how you wanted it to be, what would that world look like for you? All right, so that's just a quick example of the miracle question that you can do in individual counseling. And then another one is flagging the minefield. We know that many of our kids struggle when it comes to breaks, right? Maybe you and I, when we were growing up, we really looked forward to that holiday break, that 3 weeks off. There are kids, as you know, that don't want that time, right? They don't want that time outside of school because they may not have the food that they need. They may be facing trauma in the home. They may be facing all kinds of obstacles. Well, flagging the minefield helps prepare kids for breaks, right? So if I've got a 3-day break on the weekend and I know that my parent or guardian may be drinking, how am I going to react when that first can or that first bottle is opened, right? How am I going to respond to that? So as a school counselor, when you're flagging the minefield, you're preparing that kid for what is going to come. Now, there are a few other techniques that you can use. I love the empty chair. All right, the empty chair is another one where you say, hey, I know that you really need to have this difficult conversation with somebody in your life. So I'm gonna ask you to sit in this chair. I'm gonna put an empty chair in front of you, and I just want to role play. Talk to that empty chair as if that person was sitting there. What would you say? Right? And then we can work together on finding ways for that child to communicate their needs. And then the last one I'll tell you about is role playing. Role playing is a really good one because you're able to help kids feel comfortable and confident in what they need to address. Okay, so those are just a few techniques that I wanted to remind you of in individual school counseling. Now, when it comes to small groups, how are you going to figure out who needs to be in those groups? Again, let's start with our data. Again, we've got the ABC data, the attendance, the behavior, and the course passing. With course passing or achievement data, you can start with kids that are failing 2 or more classes, right? We were able to find unique ways to support them in small groups. And they realized that by doing that and sitting there with that group of kids, they weren't the only they weren't the only people with those struggles. There were other people that were struggling through it. And then what was cool is kids would start supporting each other, right? I'm going to find a way to support you or cheer you on so that you can get back to passing. All right. You can also look at family dynamics, divorce, death, or incarceration. Certainly, you can have small groups when it comes to race-based stress and trauma. Now, when it comes to race-based stress and trauma, of course, we want to provide small groups and safe places for the kids that are victims of racial trauma, but we also want to find ways to support kids that are creating that pain, right? Because if we don't, that pain can continue to be inflicted. We also can discuss social and emotional learning deficits. All right. Now, I want to bring in somebody's voice that I deeply respect, named Heather Bushelman. She is a school counselor in Boone County, and she also belongs to the Northern Kentucky Cooperative. So, Heather, are there any other things that you want to point out with individual or small group counseling that folks should be aware of?
Good morning, everybody. I've been bouncing around your breakout rooms and I've heard some great conversations. I think what I would maybe just add is depending on where you are within your setting and your program, especially this year with you all know there's so much more needs with each of these different topics for small groups and individual counseling is to start small. Now that you've been in school for several weeks and you've got data, I'm sure, coming every which way, figuring out which target group do you think you're going to get kind of the most bang for your buck for. So whether it's only having 2 small groups now or even just 1, and also thinking about your setting and who in your building you can tie in to helping some of these students. It may not be you running your attendance group, but you have the data that you can delegate out for somebody else to maybe check in with those kids, give them a job, help them want to get to school. For your SEL deficits, for those different types of skills, is it something that you can delegate out to your teachers in their classrooms? Maybe those students need their own coping skills, whether it's a list, it's visuals, it's their own virtual coping skills that they have on their Chromebooks. If you're a one-to-one school with technology. So I think that would be the thing I would add is to make sure when you're thinking about where to take this next, this looks like tons of data right now, and it's overwhelming. I know, especially right now, this time of year, is to think about where to start small and where can you make the biggest impact, and then later in the year start building on that. Like, okay, this group is successful, so where do we go after Christmas? Where do we go in the spring? So just keep that in mind as you're looking at some of your data and really targeting what that data is really showing you.
Yeah, Heather, I'm so glad that you said that. Thank you. And we'll hear from Heather. We'll hear from her a few more times today. But starting small is important. It is key, right? You're getting the whole picture of the Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors. It's a 62-page document, I think. All right. We don't expect you to say, all right, I'm going to take every single thing that was discussed today and I'm going to put it in my comprehensive school counseling program tomorrow. What we do hope is that you say, I really loved this idea. I really loved that idea. And this is something that I'm going to make a priority in my program. All right. So starting small is really, really great. A great way to begin. Now, I know that in that best practice number 2, we also talked about school counseling lessons, school counseling curriculum lessons. And one of the things that we provide here at the Kentucky Department of Education is information and resources regarding the individual learning plan. We have a newer system for this. It used to be a one-size-fits-all system, and now we've taken all of the constraints that came with that one-size-fits-all and away, and we've said that every single district in the state has the autonomy to create their own platform or purchase a platform that works for them and their students. All right, so using this is going to be huge for you. And elementary folks, don't feel left out. I know that by law, the individual learning plan is supposed to be in place for kids in grades 6 to 12. We know that our elementary kiddos need exposure to college and career goals and opportunities as well. So I'm going to show you some resources momentarily that will give you free lessons that you can put in your comprehensive school counseling program right now. Okay, all of these lessons are connected to social emotional learning. They're also connected to essential workplace ethics. We start with grade 5 and then work our way up. You've heard from Sarah Aiken already today, and you'll hear from her a little bit later on, but she likes to tell the story that she uses our grade 5 lessons and our middle school lessons. She was able to use those and adapt them for her even younger elementary kiddos. Okay, so we'll take a look at those lessons in just a moment. Again, everything is tied to SEL, tied to our essential workplace ethics, and in law, by law, it's supposed to start at the 6th grade level. All right, so we've got the ILP playbooks, and I'm going to show you where you can find those. You can find them here. Okay, so you can find information on our ILP just by Googling KBE ILP, and you've got loads of free lessons that you can use. You see these ILP playbooks, grade 5 to 8, and then these ILP playbooks, grade 9 to 12. Okay, if I were to click on this, you can see right here, again, everything's connected to that SEL, to essential workplace ethics, and you've got a lesson. You've got many, many lessons that you can just use right now. All of those are lessons. All of those links are individual lessons that you can put in place right now. Okay? All right, so I hope that you take advantage of that. We've also got a Google Classroom that you can use. And we've also got, that Google Classroom is full of lessons for school counselors. But we've also got, I think it's interesting that Heather was talking about coping. We've got lessons on coping for kids, okay? And we've used this lesson with adults. We've used this lesson with kiddos, all right? But this is a Nearpod that is available to you, again, free access, all right? And we hope that you use this with your kiddos and your colleagues, okay? All right, that slide, and you have access to this slide deck, all of that is available to you in this presentation. So you've got all kinds of lessons here for you to implement, okay? And again, you've got access to that Google Classroom. That Google Classroom is full of lessons. If you were at the Kentucky School Counseling Association, big shout out to KSCA, I had a hip hop and counseling lesson. Right? Of course I did. I love sharing music with you all. But in that Google Classroom, there are other lessons that you can implement in your school counseling program that also include hip hop or other music. All right. We are getting close to our break time. So we'll go ahead and take a break, run to the restroom. Let's come back at 11 o'clock. And then we'll finish up with best practice 2, we'll finish up with best practice 3, and we'll call it a day. Thank you. Melissa, just let me know and when everybody's back, and we'll go ahead. Actually, everybody should be back. Everybody should be back. So we'll go ahead.
You should be back.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Oh, let me start the recording again. Okay.
All right, so we've already talked about ABC data, but there's other kinds of data that's important. So there's also access data. I want to know who is in your accelerated learning program, right? I tell this story all of the time. When I first got to Seneca, we had 158 kids in our advanced placement program, and our school loved to brag about having the second highest pass rate in advanced placement in the state of Kentucky. But when we look closer, we realized that there was a homogeneous group that populated those classes, even though our whole school prided itself on the diversity and being heterogeneous. So when we actually looked at the access data, who's actually in these programs, we were able to see, all right, this is good for some, it's not good for all, and it's not equitable. So we've got to make a change. All right, when we made that change, we open enrolled, and instead of having 158 homogeneous kids in the program, we had 630 diverse kids that were heterogeneous, that represented our whole school. Okay, so look at that access data. And then who's being referred to special education, right? Is there disproportionality at your school? Now, we ask these questions not to point the finger at anybody or anything that's happening, but really to reflect and to grow. Now, there's also perception and barrier survey data. I want to know, what do my teachers think about the culture and climate of our school? And I'm going to use the Impact Kentucky data to determine that. What are they saying is going well here? What are some issues or barriers that they're trying to overcome? How can we improve that? I was doing one of my favorite things yesterday, actually at one of our schools, Hawthorne Elementary and JCPS, which is a Spanish immersion school. And they talked about how the Impact Kentucky data really served them, because for the first time in a while, they were able to say, all right, here's a data point that we really need to focus on that you're not necessarily going to see from the school report card or some other surveys. All right, so using that perception or barrier survey data is going to be really huge. And then, of course, you can also create and implement needs assessments, right? What are your students saying that they need? When you come to classes and do your whole group tier 1 lessons, what are your students saying they want to be taught, right? What are your families saying that they believe that their kids need more information on? What are your teachers saying needs to be implemented, right? I'm reading this book on your screen called Street Data. And it is really, really important to understand that even if you look at ABC data, and even if and that suggests that you are a data-driven school counselor, that context matters. And we can't take into account some quantitative data points without understanding the story behind them. I was in Paducah, Kentucky on Friday. I was visiting McCracken County schools and working with a group of students. And I asked them, what can you tell me about Paducah? What can you tell me about this area of Kentucky? And the things that I heard from them, I would have never gotten from data points, right? What is it like to go to school in this district? What's it like to go to your school? What are some things that are going really well? What are some things that are challenges for you? How can we work together to overcome them, right? So understanding that context before content understanding that point is paramount for school counselors. All right, and then I want to bring Heather back on. Heather, can you talk a little bit about 3 types of data?
Yeah, so I added this in here. I know for us, when we look at our data, this kind of helps us start thinking, driving us toward the goal and kind of what we want to do with our kids. So I've got all this data. What do I want to really focus on? And based on ASCA's, of course, best practices, I know they focus on 3 types of data to kind of drive what your goal is going to be. So there's process, perception, and outcome. So the process data, of course, is just your information, kind of a snapshot of just what is going to happen. So for example, like you may have 12 4th grade students in a self-management group once per week for 6 weeks. So that one is just basically, what am I doing, how long, and who's going to be in my group? And then your perception is more of, you're going to change, how do you want your kids to see what they're doing and what their own goals are? So are they going to change like their opinions of maybe how they choose to manage their growth mindset or their coping skills, or how are they going to view a course that they absolutely hate and they struggle with if it's more of a novice reduction type group? And so for those, you would do like surveys, pre and post assessments, needs assessments are big for that one. And it may just be a simple goal as, I can create a plan for a challenging task. For a lot of our students, I know this year coming back from a pandemic, if they were at home and a lot of their families were helping them a lot with their work, that's a simple goal for a lot of our kids if you have them in an intervention. And of course, the outcome data is what's going to happen after your intervention is finished. What do you hope is going to happen? And that's more going to be, you're going to increase things by a certain percentage, by certain points, or decrease depending on what type of data you want. If it's referrals, you might want to decrease the amount of certain referrals you're getting. And so that's going to highlight just really specific, before that group starts or your intervention starts, what is your hope of what's going to happen? happen. So like the number of students who failed 2 or more courses, you want that decreased by 50% by spring of 2021. So what's going to happen between fall 2020 and spring of 2021 to cause that to happen? So I wanted to put that in there because I know when we think about our data and really why we're using it, and this is also going to hold you accountable for your counseling program. When people start asking, well, what does your multi-tiered system of supports look like? These are things that you can start talking about with your tier 2 into some of your tier 3 supports that your program would give to your different students.
Awesome, thanks. And can you also talk a little bit about SMART goals?
Yes. So essentially with your SMART goals, your perception and your outcome data, those are the goals that you're going to use for your SMART goals. So I've attached on here, ASCA has a fill in the blank template. So, and again, start small. Don't choose 10 different types of data and do 10 different SMART goals because you will be burnt out, it will be overwhelming, and it won't be done to fidelity. So even just try one, but I've included some elementary and some secondary examples, and you can Google tons of different types of examples just based on how you want to write them. But your SMART goal is really going to make sure you are honing in on what you want from your intervention. This is going to drive either your student success or your program success. So that way, whenever you're doing your tier 2 and your tier 3 supports, this is what it should be based on. You have your data. Okay, what do I want to do? What's my goal going to be by the end of this? And so, and if you want to use the ASCA template, like I said, you just type in a fill in the blank form. That's all it is. It's very easy. So this is something to kind of hold you all more accountable for your counseling programs. When people start asking, what are you doing with your students? How are you making a difference? What impact? This is going to prove that, and you're going to get buy-in depending on which stakeholders you're going to show all of this data to. So.
Absolutely. All right, so thank you. And I forgot to set the stage with Heather. I told you that she's a school counselor in Boone County, but she's also Kentucky's School Counselor of the Year. So big shout out to Heather. She is going to be going to Washington and representing our state. She's already done great things for us here in Kentucky, and I know she'll do some great things in the future. She's also on the board of the Kentucky School Counselor Association, and they provide incredible resources and guidance for our school counselors. So if you are not already a member, make sure that you become a member of the Kentucky School Counseling Association. I want to give a huge shout out to Gina Crabtree. She's one of our board members who was recently very injured, unfortunately, and she's out for the next few weeks, but want to give her some well wishes. All right. So we've already spoken a little bit about how we use our time, and I'm going to show you our launch page for the school counselor survey. So for the first time this year, we use this launch page to really help collect our data and to show our district leaders just how they can make sure that they're documenting your use of time. All right. We also have some examples of how different school counselors are tracking that time. All right, so this is one example. This is from the American School Counseling Association. Also, the Kentucky School Counseling Association created this document, adapted this document, but this is one way that school counselors can track their time. We also have an example from JCPS. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to see. I think, yes, okay. So this is the other example from JCPS. We've got Dr. Michelle Searcy, who's a great friend and great ally of school counselors. She's the director of school counselors there in JCPS, and she's created this form for her counselors. Her counselors, they document their time every single week, okay, using this. And what's cool about that process is that our counselors are able to track their time and then showcase that time to their principals. Okay, so when principals are having conversations about how counselors are spending their time, Dr. Searcy is actually able to go in and say, hey, there's some issues here because maybe this school counselor is not using their time, and 60% of their time is not being utilized in school direct student services. So how can we fix that? How can we change that? All right, so having these conversations that are data driven and based on your actual time, again, is going to be really big. Okay. All right. And then we've also got school counselor appointments. Now, this is also something that is really, I don't know why, but I can do a session and give like 1 million different tools. And for some reason, this is the tool that people want. All right. So we always had appointments that we would ask for our kids. They could make appointments based on their needs. And my principal always wanted to see this form, right? She always wanted to know, what is the data saying based on who is making appointments with you and how they're identifying their needs. Okay, so having a way to allow kids to make appointments with you is also a great way of keeping track of data automatically. I also think that letting the data talk and walk, we're not able to watch that video right now for copyright stuff, but you can watch it on your own. But allowing the data to talk and walk is important, right? So one thing that we love to talk about and we love to do is have data walks in our schools with not only our staffs, but also with students and also with families. How can you put the data on walls in your media center or in your cafeteria or in your gym and allow people to go around that space and react to that data, right? When you do that and you allow other voices in, you are going to find some incredible solutions to what could have been problems. Okay, so data walks are really cool. They allow other people to give you feedback and react to current data at the school level. And then another thing that's really important, another data point that's really important is qualitative data, right? But using it with your students, allowing your students' voices to be elevated. All right, I love this quote, nothing about us without us is for us. Okay, it's hard to, as a school counselor, to figure out this is exactly what my students need from me. All right, so let's just simply ask them, what do you think would be helpful next time I go into the classroom? What are some topics that I need to discuss? There's also something called YPAR, or Youth Participatory Action Research, which I love. This allows kids to get in the school and they become data detectives. We talked a little bit ago about a data walk, data equity walk, right? They can, and let's say if we're looking at our equity data, let's have our kids do that data equity walk around and then come up with solutions. Let's also allow them to participate in something called Photo Voice. Photo Voice develops agency in students. It speaks in students' language, right? Many of our middle and high school students have phones. Those phones have incredible cameras on them. So Photo Voice is allowing them to take those phones, take those cameras, and capture things that are in their lives that could be barriers or challenges for them. And then they can also do the same with things that have allowed them to overcome some of those barriers or challenges. Okay, so we need the expertise of our kids to solve problems in schools. We were very fortunate a couple of weeks ago to go to the Kentucky Education Summit. And one of the most powerful sessions at that summit for over 800 participants in Kentucky was the student session, where they really raised their voices about the need for more information on mental health, right? They talked about mental health and their mental health needs. They also talked about the mental health needs of their educators, all right? So when we were able to actually hear from the students, it was one of the most powerful things that we had heard all day in that whole event, okay? Find a way to elevate and lift up the voices of your kids. It can be in youth participatory action research. It can be with Photo Voice. It can be simply by having conversations and asking them, what are your needs? How can I support you? Now, we've also got a lot of other great tools in Kentucky. We've got the early warning tool. The early warning tool is available for the first time ever to K through 12 educators. All right, so everybody has access to this tool, and you can quickly identify kids that may have more needs and need interventions from you with this tool. We've also created a high school graduation requirement tracker in Infinite Campus. And I was one of those counselors that I would have something called LAC cards where I was putting in information. I was checking the box after every semester. Yes, Andy completed Algebra 1, Part A and Part B, but he failed English 2, Part A. So how are we going to get Andy back in English 2, Part A? So I was doing all of that by hand. Well, now we've got a tool that will do that for you in Infinite Campus. So check out the high school graduation requirement tracker. We also, for the first time ever, have a dual credit tracker in Infinite Campus. Many of your students are working with multiple universities, right? They may be going to the University of Louisville or University of Kentucky, along with Western Kentucky University or a school from KCTS within that KCTCS umbrella. All right, this will automatically populate this sheet with different dual credit courses that they're actively taking or that they've taken in the past. Okay, this will help them keep track of those dual credit courses, and it will help you. We've also got the transient student report at Infinite Campus, which I think should be very helpful for you. All right, we know that the pandemic has caused even more transient. Okay, so this will allow you to understand how many schools a student has been to in the current school year, or in the last 1 to 3 years, or in the last 5 years. How many schools have they been to? All right, and it's going to turn your eye to allow you to focus on kids that have been to multiple schools within the same year and that continue to move around. Okay, obviously, when you see kids pop up on this report, that may suggest to you that they have some tier 2 intervention needs. We have just released on November 1st the equity dashboard in Infinite Campus. All right. And I am so proud and excited about this tool. Working at a high needs school was hard because we were often pulling pieces of the puzzle together from different platforms. Well, now we've got all of the puzzle together in one platform called the Equity Dashboard. It's now available. You can check out your data. You can make team-based decisions. We've got a whole implementation guide with videos and resources for you. You can look at root cause analyses. And again, the beauty of this is that it's just for you, okay? It's just for our schools and our school leaders, so you can make these decisions. It's not about a scorecard. It's not about any of that. It's about your reflection, growth, and prioritizing how to put the needs of many of our underrepresented students at the forefront. And then I told you earlier, we're going to talk a little bit about a huddle, all right? One of the ways that I was able to advocate for my role as a school counselor was by taking my calendar to what we called as a leadership huddle every Monday morning for 10 minutes. I would circle my biggest priority of the week. If that was getting into classrooms, if that was small groups, whatever that was, my staff knew I was not going to be on radio for that hour or few hours because I was going to be doing that thing. And my leadership team would protect that time. All right, so huddling, calendar blocking, bringing that calendar to the forefront, making sure you point out the priorities to your team and you're communicating those priorities is not only going to help you, but it's also going to help inform them about the role of a school counselor. So let us know. Feel free. If you're in a co-op, if you're virtually online, just let us know some cool things that you do that within your program. We all love to beg, borrow, and steal. So if there are some cool practices that you use, or if there's some cool things in Infinite Campus that you use, feel free to share. You can share that in your next breakout room or in the chat box. All right, so let's go to our final best practice. Best practice number 3. This is the program reflection and self-assessment. All right, so instead of just going to that best practice, I just want you to focus on going to these actual tools at the end of the document. All right, I think they're pages 49 to 56. All right, go to the program reflection, go to the self-assessment. Now, you're going to have 20 minutes in a breakout room to discuss these tools, right? And the first 10 minutes are going to be on self-assessment. The last 10 minutes are going to be on program assessment. But you can also come back to these tools individually or in your school counseling PLCs. Remember, we are asset-based, right? So before you say, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed by all the things that I'm not doing or that are not happening, let's focus on the beautiful things that are. What are the assets of your program? Focus on that first, and then figure out 1 or 2 areas that you can grow in next. All right? So I also want to remind you of this. I want you to think about the recording that plays over and over in your mind. And I want you to honestly answer this question. Do you listen to yourself or do you talk to yourself? When I listen to myself, to be honest with you, I'm not always the nicest person to myself. I'm down on the one thing that didn't go perfectly that day. There could have been 100 things that went great, and I'm focused on the one thing that didn't. But when I talk to myself, I'm reminding myself that I'm human, that I deserve grace, right? That I'm doing the best that I can. And I want that for you too. All right? Reflection is about growth. It's not about looking for things that are wrong. Okay? All right. So as we enter this breakout room, there are 3 foundational questions. All right? Think about this. What is right with you as a school counselor? What is right with your program? Okay? Again, that asset-based mindset. And then what are areas of growth for you in your program? We'll come back together at about 11:45. All right, so let's finish up. We've got about 15, 16 minutes to finish up. I'm hopeful that you've had some great conversations in your breakout rooms or at your co-op. And I'm interested in this question. What parts of your program do you need to water? You know, so if anybody wants to unmute themselves and just be vulnerable for a moment and say, this is one thing that I want to focus on. Let's just take 2 or 3 minutes to hear those things. Remember, whatever you say now at this point to the group will be helpful for many, many people that it's hard to comprehend, but your vulnerability is helpful for just about everybody on the call. Would anybody like to tell us what parts of your program do you really feel like if I focus on this, this program can really grow?
I feel the need to advocate more for myself and counselors across our district to gear us more toward servicing our students better.
Okay, awesome. So feel like we've really got to put a priority on advocating for ourselves and our students. That's great. Thank you so much for that, taking that step. Thank you.
Damien, this is Eve. I think we have a comment from CKC.
At the school level, I'm really trying to focus on students that are missing credits. I mean, that's just priority, I think, right now, is getting kids that are failing and trying to keep them from dropping out. I mean,
right. I'm really sorry. I didn't hear the first part of that.
You may have to come closer. She stated something in regards to helping kids regain their credits and kids that are not engaged and trying to help them get their credits together.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think it's so important. And some of those conversations, when looking at transcripts or report cards and trying to figure out how are we going to get you back on track, one of my strong suggestions, is to bring the family in. Right? If that person's got parents or guardians that can come to a meeting like that, get them involved so it becomes a community, it becomes a plan that's bigger than just you and that student. Right? You can also bring other teachers in to make sure that they're involved and understand that plan as well. Very good. Thank you.
Damien,
Yes.
we also have a few things in the chat. Would you like, I don't know if you would like me to read those or if you want to look at them.
Would you? I would love that.
Sure. OVEC in their breakout session discussed how to engage teachers that might be resistant or apprehensive. So how to get that buy-in for advisory and SEL discussions. That's one. And then we have another one, but I don't know if you want to talk about that one first. But that's one thing they talked about, getting that staff buy-in.
Sure. There's so many ways to approach that work. First and foremost, you have to see yourself as a school leader, in my experience, sometimes we don't see ourselves like that, so we don't put ourselves in situations to make sure that is known, right? So putting yourself in a situation where you're speaking at faculty meetings regularly, consistently, you've got 10 or 15 minutes to make sure that they know about the services that you provide. You have already created many lessons, I'm sure, for your students in reference to their social emotional wellness. We know that adults can't just automatically put social emotional learning in place until they themselves have received social emotional learning support, right? So we are working right now on a Kentucky framework for social emotional learning, and we're working with the World Leaders Council. And they talk about how adult SEL has to come before anything else. Right. So another way that you can create buy-in is finding ways to connect them with those social emotional learning tools and strategies for their own well-being, and then show them how to implement that in their classrooms. I'm going to ask Sarah Aiken to share her voice. Sarah Aiken, can you please tell us a little bit about your experience with school counseling advisories and how that's really helped set the stage for school counseling in Christian County when you were there?
Sure. So I implemented a school counseling advisory council at my elementary school. I really thought it was really important to hear all of the voices of all of our stakeholders. So I literally just sent letters to people that I thought really would be beneficial, would share their voice in there. So I had an intermediate and a primary teacher, my principal. I had a district representative as well. I had one of our school-based therapists. I had a community leader that was a business owner, but her kids also attended our school. Then I had another community member, the director of our local YMCA, but I also had chief of police on there. Now, I'll be upfront and honest, the chief of police is a friend of mine, so I might have twisted his arm just a little bit to do that. But it was so beneficial because when we were talking about the things that were going on in school, the things that we were implementing, what could we do better to improve, he was bringing in community data to share, just to kind of back up what the things that we were doing in the school. So he would share, hey, this is how many maybe arrests have been going on. This is how many overdoses. This is this. And it was really, really beneficial for him sharing what was going on in our community, the importance of why we need to implement our comprehensive school counseling programs, why we need social emotional learning, why we need mental health. And he would bring these things all the time. What I love too is even when we weren't in advisory council, he would just want to know, hey, what's going on? What can I do to support you? He was such a proponent of school counselors and mental health. And so it was just really great to have that aspect as well of him from the community.
Sarah, my humble friend, would you mind also sharing a little bit about an email that he sent to your district in reference to more of you?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I like to do is I send out monthly newsletters as well, but at Christmas and at the end of the year, I did a mid-year report of all of my numbers, how many kids I've seen, how many groups I've done, just kind of that. But then at the end of the year, I also did that. And he drafted this whole email to me and to our district leaders about basically wanting to know how many kids were not being serviced because of the 350 ARCs that I had done, the other meetings, the other responsibilities. And he was like trying to advocate for more school counselors, especially at my school, because I was the only one. And so and so I try to keep track of how many kids maybe that I wasn't getting to see, wasn't getting to work with because I was spending so much time doing other things. And he really pushed and gave some great insight of why those things were so important. So again, totally advocating for our role.
Right. So that School Counselor Advisory Council, it may sound like it's a really, really big thing that is overwhelming. And honestly, the American School Counseling Association, they give you an agenda template. They give you a template for keeping your minutes, and they recommend a minimum of 2 meetings per year. So with 2 meetings, you can get buy-in from a lot of different stakeholders, whether that's colleagues, whether that's families, whether that's people in the community, and they can help advocate for your comprehensive school counseling program as well. All right, so thank you for that. So according to ASCA, the American School Counseling Association, we should all be focusing on assessing our programs, assessing ourselves, delivering our comprehensive school counseling program, defining, so what we talked about with guidance counselor versus school counselor, defining our role, and then managing. All right, so this is what makes up a comprehensive school counseling program. I am often asked, we want to do something new here in our district. We want to do something new here in our region. Where should we start? I think we should all be very familiar with the American School Counseling national model. Okay, that national model. I'm currently working with Allen County school counselors. Shout out to Allen County. And we are doing a book study on that national model. So going through that, really trying to figure out how this national model applies to what the school counselors are doing in that district. All right. Strongly suggest you participate in something very similar for yourselves. All right. Our final best practice. Sorry, I think I said best practice number 3 was, but our final best practice that we're going to discuss is just leadership advocacy. And we're not going to do a breakout room or anything like that for this. Okay. And we've kind of been hitting this topic all day long. But remember that you can do advocacy in your setting by reminding folks that you're a school leader and seeing yourself as such, communicating that by consistently being in front of your faculty, being in front of those families, right? Finding unique ways to deliver that message. Communicate your role. So we talked earlier about flashlight presentations and making sure that not only did your colleagues understand that role, but so did your families, so did your students. Okay, so doing those. You can be on different committees and teams at your school, and you should definitely have a professional learning community of counselors either at your school or in your district. Okay, so those are other ways that we can make sure that we're advocating, and then finding ways to get involved at the school, district, and state level. Okay, we just had our first school counseling advisory council this week, and I was really, really pleased at the amount of people that showed up and contributed to that, with letting us know some different challenges they were facing, and also some different celebrations that they had. All right, we can also create advocacy in our districts by doing the advisory councils that Sarah just mentioned. Again, we can do district professional learning communities, and our co-ops are phenomenal at bringing our school counselors together and offering them resources and guidance that's going to support them. And then finally, make sure that you are part of one of our associations, right? I already mentioned how awesome the Kentucky School Counseling Association is for you. We've also got the Kentucky Counseling Association, who provide phenomenal resources. And they've got their conference in Louisville on Monday, starting on Monday. I'll be there doing a session on cultivating opportunity. We've got our Kentucky Association of School Administrators and our Kentucky Center for School Social Workers. School Safety, I'm sorry, our Kentucky Center for School Safety. Sorry about that. So we've got a lot of different ways for you to get involved in Kentucky, and I hope that you take advantage of that. All right, networking, putting yourself out there. I had a year of yes before coming to the Kentucky Department of Education and JCPS. And my year of yes, when district leaders would come to me and say, hey, we need a school counselor to elevate their voice with the news, be on the news. We need a school counselor to write an article for the local newspaper. We need a school counselor to do this interview or to be on this webinar or to do this presentation. I would say yes. And that was my way of advocating for my role as a school counselor. All right. We also have a school counselor practice crosswalk and rubric that you can check out. One of the things that your principals always want to know is, how does what you're telling me connect to how I'm going to evaluate you? Okay, so make sure that you show them that there's a direct connection with the evaluation tool, OPGIS, to our Kentucky Framework of Best Practices. All right, and then as we finish up, let's just take a few minutes and make a commitment. I want to know, we've talked about a lot of things, right? But I want to know, what can you implement soon in your program that's going to move your program forward, right? So we've spoken about calendar control. We now know, after looking at the best practices, that a mission statement for your comprehensive school counseling program is huge. A vision statement saying what you hope your kids will be able to accomplish 5 to 15 years out after leaving your program is huge, right? We know that having that advisory council is very beneficial to you in your program. Creating an appointment system. You can have QR codes for that appointment system. We had those QR codes in every classroom. We even had them in all of our bathrooms, in our cafeteria. We had them everywhere so kids could have access to making appointments with us. School counseling curriculum lessons. I'm often asked, what is one other place to start with a comprehensive school counseling program? And every time I speak to your principals, every time I speak to your superintendents, every time I speak to you, I will always reinforce we have to get into classrooms. There cannot be an excuse of, well, I'm working with a bunch of individuals on individual counseling, or I'm working on this other stuff. We've got to get into classrooms. Our kids need to know that even though they may have something going on socially and emotionally, that is absolutely average behavior. That is an average emotion to feel at their age. We normalize those behaviors. We normalize those emotions. All right, so getting into those classrooms, doing those school counseling curriculum lessons is going to be huge. All right, and again, we've got a bunch of lessons for you that you can access right now for free. All right, creating database interventions within the multi-tiered system of supports is going to be huge as well. All right, let's start considering needs assessment. How can we ask our teachers the needs of our students, our families the needs of our students, then how can we ask our students what their needs are specifically? And then let's also look at opportunity gaps based on the data that you have right now. All right, I want to give you a few things that are just a couple of heads up, things on legislation. Right now, we are working on revisions to the minimum high school graduation requirements, and we're specifically looking at that regulation in regards to the individual learning plan and early graduation. So very interested in finding ways to make those programs more accessible and relevant for our kids. And then, and we're also interested in connecting both of those specifically to social emotional learning. And then I just want you to know that students will be presenting to their legislators about mental health. Okay, so also something to keep an eye out on. I have to tell you that understanding the science of wellness and well-being is really important to me. And I hope that you are able to learn a little bit more about your social emotional needs, your well-being, and that you make that a priority yourself. All right, so one of my favorite resources is the Happiness Lab podcast. I love this. It really opened my eyes to a lot of things that were going on with me, and it really helps you focus on, again, your own well-being. I hope that you can join me. As you know, I love music, and I will be on a webinar on November 17th with a music producer who's produced music for Jay-Z, Rihanna, Beyonce, T.I., Eminem, and others named Just Lays. So I'm really looking forward to that webinar, and we'll be talking about how to use music to engage and motivate students next week. So hopefully you can join me there. Thank you for your time today, for your participation, for your engagement. Thank you for everybody that helped make today possible at the co-ops. Letitia, Melissa, everybody that's contributed, Eve, all of you all have been wonderful partners in education, and we could not do things like this without you and that partnership. So thank you. You all have a blessed day.